So President Trump may be pulling the troops out of South Korea, a very welcome move, if you ask me. Of course, nothing is official yet, and he's threatened this plenty of times. I mean, I think this was one of the things he talked about during the campaign specifically with South Korea. You know, hey, the war's been over since the 1950s. Why do we still have our troops there? It's a pretty basic question. You know, most countries, when they fight a war, you know, that is, if they fight a war off of their own territory, most countries, you know, just defend themselves, you know, like normal people, and don't go around, you know, meddling in other people's business. But when they do, for like allies and things, they normally will go home when the war's over. But the U.S. has a way of just sort of latching itself on to whatever country that it happens to be warring in at a particular time, and then it maintains a permanent presence until the end of time. And that, of course, is why there are still American troops in Germany and Japan, even though World War II has been over for, you know, many generations. So why now? Why would Trump all of a sudden want to pull the troops out of South Korea? Well, it's because he doesn't think they're paying enough. Which, you know, he can kind of make that point. Sure, the Americans are not exactly being reimbursed entirely, I'm sure, for the cost of keeping all those thousands and thousands of troops in South Korea. You know, the U.S. military is a very expensive operation. They like to spend money. That's just kind of what they do. So earlier this year, they came to some agreement to where they told the South Koreans, okay, well, we want you to pay $960 million a year. And the South Koreans apparently agreed to that. But now Trump has gone back to them and said, no, $960 million, that's not good enough anymore. We need $4.7 billion, which obviously is a lot more money than $960 billion. It's, you know, close to 5 times as much. So, as you might imagine, the South Koreans are a bit taken aback by this, considering that they thought they were going to get this whole deal for $960 million. And they are not really too happy about it at this point. They haven't said yes, let's put it that way. It's not a done deal that they've completely rejected, Trump's demands. But it's pretty clear that, I mean, they're not going to do something like that. I mean, that's a lot of money. It's a lot more than they had agreed to. And I think that this is a pretty good excuse for Trump to pull the troops out. You know, of course, I don't agree with his theory behind, you know, the use of military force to where, you know, somehow the government should make money off of it. You know, he treats the soldiers like they're mercenaries, and that the president is kind of their CEO. I think that's a pretty sick and twisted way of treating human lives. You know, because these men did not sign up to be mercenaries. Mercenaries get paid much better than the U.S. military. You know, most of the individual foot soldiers who end up in South Korea are, you know, guys who signed up because they're told by their, you know, propagandist military recruiters that, you know, hey, you're going to defend America. And, you know, in reality, they find out that they're going to defend South Korea for some reason. You know, a nation that, you know, by the way, is not that fond of Americans in general. I mean, you know, Koreans are pretty racist in general if you talk to them. You know, and beyond that, a lot of South Koreans just don't like having the American military occupy, you know, a good portion of their country. They don't like having all these foreigners stationed there. But the South Korean government and, of course, the U.S. government have agreed for many decades to keep troops there. The South Koreans, of course, like having the Americans there as human shields so that, you know, the Nokos, the North Koreans, know that, hey, if you invade us, you're declaring war on the United States. And, of course, that's a war that, you know, North Korea couldn't win. So, you know, the American troops serve as good deterrent. And, of course, the U.S. likes having troops there and having a presence there just because, you know, the U.S. Wants to have a global network of military bases, you know, for their efforts at world domination, or as we call it, as our, you know, euphemistic leaders like to say here in America, so that America can take a position of leadership in the world or something like that. They always come up with some weird Orwellian language like that. And so that's why, a lot of American leaders are okay losing money in South Korea and keeping these troops here, because they get much more value out of it than just the money. They don't, they understand they're losing money, but they want the power. They want to maintain this global superpower status, being the most powerful government on the face of the planet. And, keeping troops in South Korea to defend the Koreans is a good excuse to keep a substantial military presence very close to China, because, of course, it's only a short jog through North Korea into mainland China. And so the presence in South Korea has been a very important part of the American strategy of trying to contain China, in the I guess you could say the post-Cold War era, in which China became the new potential rival to the U.S.'s global superpower status after the fall of the Soviet Union. Which is why I'm rather surprised that the U.S. envoy, who is in South Korea, and given Trump is not very good. Trump says he picks the best people. He tends to pick people who are recommended to him, who actually don't agree with him at all and subvert his agenda. But the U.S. envoy that's in Korea now apparently is backing Trump up and actually following orders and carrying out the wills of the will of the president, saying, hey, I don't want to be the bad guy. I don't want to take troops out. We don't want to take troops out of South Korea. You guys know we don't want to do that. We want to keep our troops here for you guys to protect you and do selfless things like that. But nobody gets a free ride. Which again, that's not as good of a position as I'd like. But the mercenary theory of the U.S. military is better than the sort of the imperial stormtrooper theory. If you believe that the idea of these soldiers is to go out and make money for the government, that at least is a better position than saying that their job is to go out and achieve world domination. And the reason for this is that, if you're following the mercenary theory, then you're only going to engage in conflicts that actually make you money, which they aren't good conflicts because they make you money, but there's less of them. So you will, by default, if you go with this whole mercenary tactic of thinking of the troops as mercenaries working on behalf of the government that are there to, make money and turn a profit, well, then you're going to engage in a lot less wars, because war really isn't a very profitable game. This $4.7 billion that Trump is trying to extract from South Korea, it's really like an insurance premium, because those troops there, there aren't nearly as many American troops in South Korea as there are South Korean troops. There's a lot of South Korean troops, so the Americans are not going to somehow fight off a North Korean invasion by themselves. That's not why they're there. They're there to act as human shields, as I said before. They are insurance for South Korea. And if the South Koreans are feeling a bit safer, they feel like they're doing their best to make peace with North Korea and with China, well, then they don't need the Americans there anymore. And that'll be a good excuse to essentially kick them out. And this is also a good excuse for Trump to pull them out. Even though, we all know that, the reason that the troops are there, like I said, is more about China than Korea. The pretense has always been about Korea. So it gives the bipartisan foreign policy establishment much less of a leg to stand on in opposing this move. Because I think this, just like with pulling out the troops out of anywhere, it's very easy to make this case to the American people that, hey, there are these troops here, and if they get attacked, well, then we're going to be sucked into a world war with, China. And that's not something that anybody should want. So if this actually does go through, this will be a rapid or a massive de-escalation in sort of the potential for global conflict. It will make it less likely that the U.S. ever gets into a war with North Korea or China. And, of course, the U.S. can't get into a war realistically with either of those countries because they both have nukes. So a war with either of them would be apocalyptic. And that's not something that could ever be, considered. Unfortunately, the increasingly radical bipartisan foreign policy establishment doesn't think that that's so unthinkable. Hillary Clinton during the campaign openly mused about war with Russia, another nuclear power. This is something that, during the Cold War, people wouldn't have been so quick to even joke about. And so that's why, if we don't want to get into a nuclear war, we should not prepare to go to war against nuclear states. It is in the interest of all nuclear states to not threaten one another at all. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.